Hello folks, I managed to start streaming something. Okay, so we're working now, really. Hmm. Right. Check. Want to check my other videos. Yeah, let's hide it. You can see that I'm not very proficient at this. So, okay, here we go. Perfect. Looks alright. You can see that I'm not very proficient at this. Okay, so, okay, here we go. Perfect. Looks alright. Okay, so let's get hopping into actual work, and what we're going to do here is going to be a little bit of work for my research project that I'm carrying out at the moment, and we're going to make some notes. So what I'm going to rely on is a couple of notes I already made on some topics I'm really interested in at the moment. The main thing I've been working on recently is group agents. Group agency in philosophy is a quite interesting topic, and it focuses on whether or not groups can be treated as agents in the same way that humans and, say, animals or other more obviously agential entities can be treated as humans. Now, one of the things that's difficult about this is obviously that when people talk of human agency, when it comes to human agency, there are a couple of features that humans have, psychological features, biological, psychological features, that make it easier to explain why they're agents and why they can act. And of course, if they can act in typically agential ways, right? I'll close the window quickly. Then they should also be able to bear responsibility, and we can blame them, we can hold them accountable, right? That's kind of why the whole thing is exciting. Now, the thing here is that it's not that easy to figure out exactly what the criteria are for being an agent, and whether any whether anything like humans have it, right? So, whether anything else than humans have fit those criteria. So, for example, when it comes to agents like corporations, right? Or so, how should this work? whether anything else than that humans have. Right, so I just wanted to chat separately, just in case anyone turns up and wants to ask any questions or say hi or anything, that this should be here. Now the paper we are going to be working on is going to be Leo Townsend's paper. I think he's at the University of Vienna. There's a very strong research group there on human action and agency and group agency, and we're going to look at this paper by Leo. It's titled Groups with Minds of Their Own Making. The version I'm using is a pre-publication version, so this is not copyrighted yet, and I think the researcher shared it on their website or one of the research sharing community spaces like ResearchGate or academia.edu, where you can usually find a lot of research papers that people publish and get out. So right, groups with minds of their own making. And why I want to, I read this paper already, but what I want to do is, of course, make some notes on it. Why? Well, because it's really useful. When I make notes on something, basically I really learn it, and making notes on a difficult text really helps to remember the key points, the key arguments. If you're reading philosophy just for fun or information, you don't need to get this deep, but if you try to write about philosophy or anything, you really need to be able to remember some of the key steps and how different people divide the field, what kind of definitions they use, and so on. So here we go. Basically, Townsend, like myself, is thinking that agency is perfectly, group agency makes pretty good sense. Group agency has been resuscitated and repackaged, perfectly respectable, and so on. Yeah, nothing metaphysically untoward. So yeah, this is an interesting. Townsend agrees that there are group agents in a substantial sense. What does substantial sense mean? Substantial sense means that groups are not simply collections of individuals. Groups are entities that have features which their members don't have, right? This is quite important. So, right, Putty says that groups with the right structures are full-fledged persons. And I added here a point, right, that Putty groups with the right structure are persons. My point, I'll put it in square brackets, but not human persons. Okay, so there are different kinds of persons, and this is important because human agents, human persons are of course quite unique in the way in which they are agents, right? We form intentions, with dreams, aspirations, ambitions, beliefs, religion, faith, emotional attachments, and so on. And probably our life is intrinsically valuable in itself. Right. Okay, so such groups can make up their minds. Such groups can make up their minds, which is decide, and be held responsible for their thinking and doings, right? Their actions and their decisions, and they are also conversible, which means they can engage in speech acts. So if you think about, for example, a company has spokespeople. The spokesperson is the one who delivers a message, but of course the spokespeople are not the people who formulate the message of the company. Spokespeople are just people occupying positions, filling in a role in a corporation, but the corporation itself is the one formulating the decision and sending a message. Okay, so right, what is the project here? Okay. Okay, so actually Townsend, I didn't remember this paper well, I read it maybe a year ago or so, probably 2 years. Okay. No, so Townsend does agree. Townsend criticizes how List and Putty formulate the ability to make up one's mind about something and what it means to speak for oneself, right? So he offers an alternative to LNS, LNP, based on Morin's work. There we go. Richard Morin is a famous philosopher. He's at Harvard University. He's also doing a lot of work on agency, and he has some influential thoughts on this. And it seems to me that Townsend thinks that there are group agents, but he thinks that List and Putty get it wrong. But some of the features are which render group agents persons. So, right, I made this. Yeah. So some people think that personhood should not be extended to groups, and right. Townsend is going to say that maybe groups can make up their minds and speak for themselves, but in a different way than how List and Putty explain this. And that's important because, for example, if you think about legal responsibility, like whether a ministry is responsible for approving a military attack on someone, it's going to be interesting and important to see how the group agent exactly works when we discuss the responsibility attribution is going to matter. Okay, so what was noteworthy here? Right, there is a definition of persons and the concept of personhood, performative. What makes something a person? We'll just shorten. What makes something a person is that it can perform certain things. It's a performative account of personhood. The contrast is usually intrinsic accounts. Intrinsic accounts would say that what makes something a person is a constitution, right? The person is an agent with a certain type of biology or psychology or so, right? Or both, right? Often we have a biology-based psychological criteria set, not just one criterion, but several. Alright, and so which performances are important, which performances matter to personhood according to list and putty. It's about making up one's mind, making up one's mind about things, that is forming one's own mental attitude. So right, in a case of a company, think about how a company forms their business plan, its decisions whether to purchase certain materials, whether to enter into a contract with the bank for a revolving door loan, and so on and so on and so on. Control matters. Control is going to be being able to exercise some control over how one's beliefs and other attitudes are formed and revised. So, right, this is sensible. The sum is there because, of course, we can't totally control everything about the attitudes that we have. For example, if I see that there's a table in front of me, then I just see that there's a table in front of me. There's nothing to do about that. But page borders would be nice to quickly expand on this and add some page numbers on the bottom. It's going to be helpful if I have to print this out or work with it later. Okay. And they can disappear for the moment. We don't need to see them. Right. Okay. So, okay. Companies do this kind of thing as well, right? Sometimes companies just get raw data which they have to accept, like legislation from the government. But then how exactly they interpret it, that's already going to be how they form their mental attitudes, right? So let's put an example here. Example, company receives a court order. The order's content is not up to them, so the info is fixed. They don't form it. No control over that. But how they interpret it and how they react to it is up to the company. So there is an element of control here. Okay, so but it characterizes control as supervision of attitude formation. So it's a little bit different from our psychology, right? We can do this by reasoning, like when you think that, oh, we don't have milk in the fridge, I need milk later to make a cake, so I need to buy milk, right? That would be an instance of reasoning. Companies can do this, of course. There's research, and one of the directors feels that they don't have enough information on what would be best for the company regarding purchasing some new technology that helps to make their buildings more sustainable, like new solar panels or a new generator. And they're going to give the task to some specialist in the organization who can prepare a report, do the research. Okay, this is again a little bit different from how it would work for an individual human being, of course, but that's okay. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, because obviously, but he's not talking about individual humans, right? So he's talking about group agents. So some difference is to be expected. Again, this is going to matter if we discuss, if you think that there's a government agency that overreaches, how did they use their abilities to control their attitude formation that determine their actions. It's going to matter a lot in discussions of blame and guilt and things like that, and whether they deserve retaliation or not, and what form of retaliation they deserve, and so on. Or regulation should be made about them. Okay, so reasoning requires to be able to reflect on the proposition of content of one's attitudes and form second order attitudes. This sounds really complicated, but what it means is just like, I know that I decided to buy milk later, but this actually is a bad idea because today our food delivery arrives, right? So that decision should be cancelled. That's a second order meta attitude about my first order attitude, so it's nothing. It's first order, second order talk is just useful because not obvious that every animal and every agent has this ability. Some AIs just form attitudes and automatically do whatever attitude they formed. It triggers an action. There is no meta reflection on whether that action is good. Some more complex AIs do have different meta levels. Okay, reasoning has to satisfy standards of rationality. Now that's a tricky one because reasons responsive consistent, because standards of rationality are really complex, and I think a lot of the standards of rationality for humans do depend on the kind of particular biology that we have. Like well-being is a certain kind of thing for a human. So this is a problem with Mr. Putty, in my view. Standards of rationality for individuals are different from organizations. Humans have a specific type of well-being and end goal, including health and so on. Companies have different goals, fundamental criteria to which standards of rationality are relative. Of course, this is also about what is the scope of rationality. If you think the scope of rationality is just very general, you have to be logical, you shouldn't think both that A and not A at the same time, like you shouldn't say it's raining and not raining at the same moment, then that's okay. Kind of inquiry research. So research is actively seeking out evidence. And then we have regulatory control, and that's going to be about. So I'm just looking at some written notes I also have on the same paper. I read this probably 2 times on different occasions, one time on the computer, one time probably in print. Okay, seeking out relevant attitudes. Okay, so the key here is this is self-regulation is about additional self-motivation, reminding ourselves of the important, relevant ideas, discipline, and so on. For example, if it's hard to act on my belief that eating meat is wrong, then I need to use ways of self-regulation. For example, I should abstain from buying meat, and then I won't be tempted to eat meat, and so on and so on. I shouldn't every time I crave meat, I should watch a video about animal suffering, industrial farms or something, if that's important for you, of course. It's just an example. Maker's knowledge. So that's an element of self-knowledge. That's important, right? A lot of our attitudes we know in a special way if they are our own attitudes. I know what I intend to do because I formed my intention to do something. Other people only know my intentions if they can infer it from my behavior, or I told them about it, and so on. These are obviously different ways of knowledge, and Maker's knowledge is very different. It's through being the author of our mental states. It's a little bit similar to what Kieran Sedia and Sidney Shoemaker worked out, I think. Some shade of those views. Actually, Richard Moran has a similar view as well. These are quite interesting views because, they can explain why self-knowledge has a much higher epistemic standard, why we can actually be pretty sure about what we know, feel, think, and so on, rather than. Alright, so this gives authority. This gives authority to speak for oneself, right? It's important. Even for an organization, of course. Okay, and then speaking for oneself as self-representation. Okay, so this is important, right? We can give our word to others, we can make promises, we can enter into contracts, right? Which can be conceptualized as a kind of promise. We can express our attitudes. If someone says they're going to start a war or they're going to acquire some land, we have to take them at face value, otherwise we're going to end up with a disaster. If a political entity is too soft in face of pressure, when the person who's pressuring them is obviously willing to use force and violence, then that's a silly thing. Okay, and so Putty says here that there are 3 basic ways of communicating one's attitudes. Now, what did I comment about this? What did I... Alright, so I made a comment in Hungarian, right? I'm Hungarian originally, so it's sometimes nice to translate things. If you are working in English, but English is not your native language, it's a good idea to learn all the specialist expressions that you ever come across in your own native language as well, because sometimes you might want to talk to people in your research community, and sometimes for other reasons. Okay, so what's next? Right, there are three kinds of communicating one's attitudes, and then that's reporting, avowing, and pledging. These are, of course, public acts. It doesn't mean that that's all there is. All there is in the whole world about this topic. What it means is just avowing is kind of like elköteleződni, commit yourself to something, or to kind of publicly admit that you have done something. This pledging is more like taking a pledge, right? Like saying that yes, I am going to do something. There's a long discussion here. All right, sorry folks. The mail came. Okay, thank you everyone for the patience. Let's move on. Right, so Buddy goes into some detail about what are the benefits of these things. So the benefits of commitment are that it gains it more like projects reliability, right? If you commit to things, people will think, okay, this person is reliable. It gives us credibility. People can believe. It earns trust and fosters reliance, right? People will be more likely to rely on us if we make commitments and go through with them. The audience reasonably expects us to maintain an attitude once we have taken it on. If someone flip-flops, changes their attitudes in public a lot, then others will know how to, that they're an unreliable person. Right, so this enables cooperation, trust, and so on. Contracts. You can see that leaders who always change what they're saying, turn on their allies regularly, fire people who they've been praising for long terms and so on, who are haphazard in these ways, usually end up being regarded as enormously unreliable and dangerous or mentally unstable. Okay, so let's go on. Self-regulating, self-representing groups, right? So the picture is getting more and more complex as we are exploring kind of like how people make decisions. Right, so the idea here is that groups can control their behavior and represent themselves in society. They have the requisite abilities for being treated as persons, right, for moral purposes, moral, political, legal purposes. Okay. So this is reconstructing Putty's and List account. This is just still the first 25% of the paper, and I think I don't have any more notes here in the electric version, but I do have some notes on the paper version. So what are the main things here? Right, so usually organizations employ voting and or authority systems, right? There are competent people who make the decisions about certain things, certain managers, leaders, specialists, and so on. But also often committees vote. This is an aggregation of individual decisions, and the mechanisms of aggregation are very important to how an organization works. Aggregation creates group attitudes, right? So it transforms individual attitudes into something else. And it's very interesting because a group might form an attitude that, or a set of attitudes that none of the group's members hold. Right, so the discursive dilemma comes up, right? It might be the case that simple voting is usually insufficient for aggregation. Why? Because it can be irrational, right? Meta reflection is needed to form rational attitudes both at the sub and group level. Why? What is the discursive dilemma? The discursive dilemma, you can see here, people might vote on two issues, and depending on how they aggregate, they might end up with ambiguity or an inconsistent set of ideas that nobody really wants to endorse, right? So let's say you ask people, is P true? You make a statement, is it raining outside? Some person says yes, no, yes. Overall, if you look at simple majority, you get yes. If it's raining outside, are the streets wet? No, not necessarily. I don't know, maybe this person thinks the streets have some special mechanism that keeps them dry, or they're fluid resistant or whatever. The other says yes, yes. Majority again said yes. Q, so it's raining, right? Majority said yes. Are the streets wet? No, no. Majority says no. That's illogical, right? Because obviously, purely logically, this should hold. The facts might be different, but there might be cases where this can be a real problem, right? Three judges are trying to make a decision about someone's guilt, and they disagree about whether something is good evidence for a certain crime having been committed, or someone deserving a certain kind of punishment, like do they meet a threshold for a life sentence and so on. Simple majority might lead to decisions where actually the decision is incoherent and illogical. So this kind of collective irrationality is, of course, an issue. So it's important that there are many kinds of voting and aggregating mechanisms. Don't go just for simple organizations. Don't have to. And usually in practice, don't stick with simple majority procedures. They observe outcomes of decision procedures and reflect on them, and this is where the meta attitudes come in and change their decisions and decision making processes to arrive at better rational results. Right? This is going to be important. Okay, so the organization can change, right? It's like a person. It's like a person in that they can change and improve how they make decisions. This is important, for example, in AIs that are learning AIs as well, right? Like people would ideally want AIs that can improve their decision making. Now the problem is, how do you code and give AIs this kind of meta abilities, right? Like we would want AI to recognize, hey, that decision was pretty unfair, I should make better decisions, or what I said, what I recommended was maybe harmful, or you know, or insensitive, or whatever violates a code of secrecy or privacy, then it needs to do better. But we are not yet there, especially morality and in general social norms are very far away from being reliable and well coded. Okay, so there are also external criteria for speaking for oneself. Okay, and what are these? The group authorizes, felhatalmaz, gives might to someone, right? Authorizes someone to be its spokesperson. Now, if you look at the vocab here, is extremely journalistic and media lingo laden, but that's partly exactly because corporations work through the media with the public mainly, right, through advertisements, statements, and so on and so on. And so we need to use this marketing and public relations vocab. And governments these days use the same, right? Like, I mean, if you look at all the governments have social media accounts and troll armies and all that jazz. Okay, so short story here. What is being said? speaking up is usually a way of committing to something. Right, informed commitments. So the groups are expected. Expectations are created, right, towards group. Right, its behavior, and of course, spokespeople can offer explanations of changes, apologies, and excuses. Right? Sometimes the organizations don't do what they vowed to do, and in those cases they have to behave very similarly to normal people. Okay, now Townsend goes on to discuss two problems with the I write List Putty account because I think List is Christian List, the professor from where is he? LSU, LES, London School, LSE, London School of Economics. He is pretty committed to something along these lines. I mean, maybe his account has changed. I haven't read his recent publications, but he and Putty work together on several papers, and List keeps working on more similar things as well. So, what are the issues that that Townsend highlights? So. The problems, ooh, wow, a lot of notes here. Good grief, people. There's plenty of stuff going on. Okay, so this is kind of Putty's idea of how we make a decision, how we make up our minds, and right, Putty's model of making up one's mind about something is a model of active thinking and decision making about what one will think about. Very meta, right? So it's not thinking about something, it's thinking about what to think about, which is rational. I mean, companies, organizations have to be careful with their resources, either because it's public money, like in the case of government or hospital or school, or they have to watch their bottom line, like a university, or they have to make a profit, like a firm. Okay, but, so this is maybe T's point. Is it T's point? No, right, so this is still Putty, and it is passive. What kind of attitude changes actually take place? Oh, that's strange. Obviously, this is problematic. Agent can usually kind of interfere in their own thought process anytime. They're not bystanders or led by some principles and norms that they are disattached from, right? Like even they're not distanced from. Even if someone follows the rules of logic, they can always try to reflect on whether it's reading them in the right way, whether the premises, in light of where the argument leads one, where my premise is okay, was my reconstruction of what the logic demands sensible. That's all important. Okay, so Townsend's criticism is that Putty's account of making up one's mind about something is passive. But persons are normally active in thinking. Thinking is a mental activity. It's not just something that happens to us. And we usually focus on the object of the attitude, not on managing our own attitudes. Now this is interesting. I think it is actually a mix. So this, I think people do switch between more meta approaches to their own thinking and between focusing on the main point of what they're doing, right? So right, putty sounds as if people, persons, including organizations, would only have a kind of external control over their thought processes, which does sound a bit weird, right? So there is a distance between agents and their attitudes, which is weird if this really is. I mean, I'm not 100% sure whether Townsend is exactly correct in this reconstruction of the Putty-List account of group agency, because then why would Putty... Right, so if T's reconstruction is correct, why would List and Putty claim that persons have maker's knowledge of their attitudes? Surely we have maker's knowledge in virtue of being involved in their formation at the first order level, right? So yeah. Okay. Okay, so Townsend says that occasionally people need to distance themselves from their attitudes and attitude forming processes, but that's the exception, not the rule. Again, I think this depends on the person and what they think about. You know, if you're raising children, you focus on first order things, what to have for dinner, what to do on the weekend with them, are they progressing in their abilities and so on, right? Are they happy? But you also think a lot about your parenting style, decision-making processes, emotional attitudes to what your children say and do, and so on. So there's a lot of normal reflections. I don't think what Townsend is really correct. I think he's trying to set up a bit of a more radical view of List and Putty's view than what they actually commit to, and I think he's presenting a bit of an oversimplified view compared to what people are actually doing when they're thinking about something. Right, but okay, let's move on. We are progressing, and I think we might actually be almost halfway through this paper. Yes, because the last couple of pages are just references. There's a long list of references and works cited. Understandable. It's a complex paper. And, kudos to Townsend. He really did seem to have just gone and read everything that was out there by putty and list at the time, plus of course a bunch of other things. So lots of research went into this paper, but it's pretty substantial, and it's a good paper. I mean, the research group where Townsend is working in Vienna is really top notch, very high levels. So that could be anywhere, Oxford, Berlin, Zurich. I mean, Vienna is a robust university. Sometimes people don't know, but maybe in the US they don't. In Europe everyone knows, of course. Europe is a bit bigger market, higher education, and has more centers of excellence than the US. The US is a bit different in structure, and it has a couple of outstanding places, maybe 40, 50 universities which are really world class and dominating in their fields. But I would say Europe has probably a good 100, 120 organizations. Some of them are in par or better than the US ones, and some of them are very similar quality, maybe specialized in different fields, or doing more work in local languages, French, German, Italian, Swedish, and so on. But yeah, it's a bit different. No? Okay, anyway, so much about the meta considerations about the merits of Townsend's research. And okay, so right, so what I'm looking at is Townsend is saying here something: to insist that making up one's mind be associated with the sort of case in which a person's deliberations issue directly in her attitudes is not to deny that often enough we do find ourselves in this kind of alienated situation with respect to our own attitudes. Okay, it is just to deny that what one is doing when one resorts to techniques of self-manipulation and self-regulation called for in such situations deserves to be called making up one's mind. Okay, this is interesting. So, so basically T says that LNP's account of making up one's own mind is not really characterizing typical normal decision making and thinking. Okay, I see. He mentions that there is the same issue with LNP's view of maker's knowledge. Okay, now this is exactly the issue I was raising. Like, is this true? You yourself do not have to scan evidence in order to ascertain whether you believe. Now, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I think we do have to scan evidence when we make up our minds whether or not we believe. If you ask me whether I think there's going to be a World War III soon, I would want to scan evidence, right? I would probably reread some of the international relations, politics analysis I read recently, look at some of the economics indicators, military indicators again, or look for more information where I think I don't have enough. Right. Anyway. Yeah. If I have made up my mind that P, then there is no question for me of needing to muster up psychological evidence, such as the fact that I have made up my mind. That's okay. That's just a normal self-description. Okay, so the attack here is that they seem to say that one has to take as evidence one's earlier judgment formation, judgment that P, better that's belief, intention, hope, whatever, in order to know that one believes, intends, hopes that P. Now this sounds counterintuitive, since just forming the attitude itself should grant us knowledge about having the attitude. Yeah, that's a good point by Townsend. I think that's true. Maybe List and Putty haven't read up on the self-knowledge debates between like 2006 and 2012. There's been a huge development in this field, partly thanks to earlier work by Ray Langton, David Velleman, and then some new work by people like Brie Gertler and a lot of work by some work by Sarah Paul, and a lot of work by Alex Byrne and Kieran Setia. It's been some fantastic stuff. Richard Morin contributed to this, as I said, as well. I believe Tamar Shapiro might have had something. She's at Yale. So this is all. A lot of this stuff happens to like Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Stanford, and Harvard, and Yale. It's a bit insidery and hard to join the discussion sometimes, but it's fast, and you do have to be really up to speed if you want to comment on these things while they're going on and the views are being updated and worked out. All right. Yeah. Okay, but I made a point here to in favor of Putty and List, and I think this is something that or List and Putty. Nah, I usually write. Let's be consistent. In case of specialist decisions or weighty decisions, people actually do often second guess themselves, and in organizations it is normal to question an expert in a meeting before accepting their report and using it as input into decision making. So, if you have a well-working, for example, specialist advisory board or board of, executive board, they are going to look at all the important reports that they use together and pose questions and poke holes in them and throw them back. And if they don't live up to scrutiny. And I think people do this sometimes with their own plans, right? Like if I'm planning to invest money, buying a house, right, or something, sending my kids to school, which one? Did I make the right decision? Moving places, moving jobs and places. People do scrutinize their own attitudes in this little bit external way. So maybe putting on this focus a bit too much on how things are actually done. Yeah. Not yeah. So I think right. So this is my point so far. It seems to me that Townsend makes a mistake. He thinks that there's only one kind of person, and his objections to List and Putty are based on groups not really being or having the kind of mental attitude forming processes that individual human persons do. I don't think this is a problem because groups are obviously not individual humans, so they don't have to be exactly alike. They can be sufficiently similar, and if in many cases our decision making is a bit removed, meta, um, reflective, that's okay to be the dominant mode of decision making in groups, right? So just because at the individual level that's not the norm, it doesn't mean that at the group level this can be the norm. All right. So, you know, I'm reflecting here a bit on what the guy is saying, right? And yeah, he's a good researcher, but of course, you know, when you're reading any research paper, you have to always take into account that these are people who know their field very well. They're smart. They're probably honest. They're really trying their best, but you know, you are also a person, and yeah, and you can make your points, and you might have a good point. Even if you don't, it's good to try, and that's how you get practice and get better at poking holes into um, the established research, and that's how you get to the level and the point where you can actually make some original contributions, right? So you should be removed sometimes from just believing and focusing on people's state, right? But to be honest, first when I read the paper, I can't do this, right? I'm reading this paper probably for the third time, third time, I'm not sure. Okay, so T says, let's go on. T goes on to discuss things. Corporations are not like individual persons. Corporations have what's that? Positions. Okay. Positions. Sometimes I can't read my own notes. Positions forming their attitudes, not individual people. This is my point again. The Vice Chancellor, for example, is not the same as person XYZ. Right. This does sound more like my point than Townsend's point. Does he say this? No. Okay, so yeah, I think what he reiterates here, all of this captures neatly, is talking about list and parties account, the first person perspective of a single of a group, organized group, but it does not do justice to the first person perspective of a single person who makes up memory. So basically he's saying, yes, I see that I see that they characterize groups well, but then groups are not like individuals. See, this is a problem. I mean, this is good. Groups should not be made out to be like individuals. Now, I think Townsend's point is going to be, okay, but then how can they be held responsible? Which is a fair question, right? You need a story about that. But I think a story can be told nevertheless, right? So, yeah, so this is a problem because how we make decisions is part of what renders us responsible and liable to blame, praise, and right establishes accountability. You can frame it that way as well. This is good because I think there are different ways of making decisions, and a being does not have to exemplify all of them to be liable to held accountable or responsible, right, blamed, praised. Right, so there is a difference in opinion, and that's okay. You know, it's also interesting, right? Because then, of course, that explains why I'm more sympathetic to Listenputty and Townsend is less. Here's the question. And so if I would write something about this, or I include this in my written work, then I have to say something about this difference. Okay, now at this point, Townsend is going to go on and talk about the second problem. The problem is self-representation. And I will say goodbye to you guys at this point because I have other business to do as well today. So if you joined in, thank you so much. It's been pretty fun and nice to work through text in this way. And I might continue with some other texts and some other my own papers and things I'm working on these days. As you see, these notes are quite short and they're detailed because I use them for writing a research paper. Obviously they have to be. And right, so if this is maybe something pleasant. You can see this is quite airy. It is long, but you can kind of read through it. Plus, it includes a lot of my own reflections, which I can just take out as they are to paper. And also, basically, the other sections, if I would write a paper, an essay, give a presentation, a lecture about this topic, I can use a lot of this as it is for my paper. I don't need to do much editing or add much to it, right? I just rephrase it to fit the context well. So this is one way to take notes and work through academic papers that you have to work with. I hope that was helpful or interesting to some of you, and I wish you all a lovely rest of the day. Bye bye.